Lucky you.
36 best holes in
Into
golf.
Alternate Shots podcast,
Barney's Army.
where we talk about
Sandy.
golf, poker,
James Bond.
horse racing,
Double.
classic movies.
Zenyatta.
We have no script.
Down the stretch they come.
We are glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Hey, Billy Regan, we are so thrilled. Today, we have a celebrity, and I don't mean just in golf, in so many areas. He's had such a life and has only lived half of it. I know he's got another half in front of him.
I do.
We're thrilled to have Billy Harmon on the podcast. Billy, so thrilled to have you here.
I'm very grateful royalty. To be here. We were originally members of Waikiki Guild. And so Dad would let us come over play on Mondays, was caddy day back then. And so I can remember maybe 9 or 10 playing on Mondays. When Dad finished third in the Open in '59, I was only 8. So I was upset that he didn't win. I realize now him finishing third in the Open at age 43 with 6 kids as a host pro might have been a greater feat than winning the Masters, to be honest with you. But so my memories kind of started then, I would say 8, 9 years old.
8, 9 years old. And
were you playing already?
I was playing. Yep. I can remember we would go in and get a brown cow or something at the turn, and I realize now the bartender probably hated us because he had to go in the kitchen to get the ice cream and stuff.
Scoop of ice cream.
Looking back on it, I bet he hated seeing the little Harmon kids come in there on Mondays, And Craig said something very interesting. I said, I have a picture of Dad played with Hogan the last round of the Open in '59. And it's a picture taken probably from the front right of the tee. So it was Hogan in his follow through. You saw the clubhouse in the back was beautiful. And Dad was there leaning on his club. I now know that Dad shot 70 and beat Hogan by 6 shots, finished third, lost by 2. And I tried to imagine any other club pro in the world that could have done that. Let's say they were on the last tee with Tiger Woods with a chance to win the Open, and they were going to beat Tiger by 6. And I thought about how comfortable he must have been, to do that, because he was 43 or 4 years old. He wasn't playing in any tournaments. And Craig said something interesting. I'd never heard this. He said, well, Dad must have thought he was one of them.
Right.
So when he played with Hogan or Snead or some of the better players, he knew that they were, better than him for the most part. But he didn't think that if he played good, he couldn't beat him, So he must have felt that I'm kind of one of them.
He was one of them.
He was, as it turned out. But a story that will add to that is Craig Wood told me that when he hired Dad, he asked my dad, what type of player you want to be? And he said, well, I want to be like you. And we called him Uncle Craig. And Uncle Craig said, well, the way you hold on to the club and that snap hook you hit, you won't get out of Westchester County. And so my dad, which was true, he said, well, I love the game. I'll do whatever it takes. And Craig Wood said, yeah, well, a lot of people say that, but when the improvement doesn't come right away, they'll retreat back to what feels good. And he said, your father got mad at me and said, I'll do what it takes. And so he did do what it took. And then I also have a photo in my office at the club of the very first Masters Champions dinner. It was called the organization meeting. It's written on the, and Dad is, they've got all the champions and Bobby Jones and Cliff Roberts, and Dad is standing up and Craig Wood and a few other guys are kneeling down in this picture. And Craig, just by coincidence, was kneeling under Dad. So I said to Dad one time, did you ever needle Uncle Craig about him telling you that you weren't going to be any good? Now you're at the champions dinner with him at Augusta. And Dad said, yeah, I needled him. I named my second son Craig Wood Harmon, because had Craig Wood not told me the truth, I'd have never been any good.
But what's interesting about where you said that putt was, Greg Norman wasn't that far off that line.
Yeah, Dad was more behind the hole. Norman was slightly more pin high. The putt that Norman made, you couldn't make 1 out of 100. How bad was that second shot he hit?
It was, what would you say that was? He had a perfect drive, as he was
6
a great
iron,
driver.
and he hit it in the middle of those bleachers.
Yeah.
And so it was unbelievably bad shot, really, because the bleachers had to be 20 yards to the right of the green, I would think.
At least.
So it was 40 or 50 yards offline with a 6-iron, one of the great players ever. And he did it at Augusta in 86.
Same thing at Augusta.
Same thing. And so isn't that funny how you guys play? Water seeks its level, boy. If you have a flaw in your swing, or you have the shot, in Hogan's case, the fear of the hook stuff, it's coming, boy. The problem is you can almost feel it,
Yeah.
The thing that is intriguing, there's a lot of intriguing things about Norman, but he's such an enigma to me because he's won 90 tournaments worldwide. So how can you win 90 tournaments and be a choke artist, right? That doesn't go together.
No.
There's no way you can win that many tournaments. When Butch worked for him, Butch said something interesting. He said he didn't know how to gear down. So if Tiger had a tournament to win, or Jack had a tournament to win, they knew how to shoot for the middle of greens. And, you could write their name on the trophy if they had a 1-shot lead with 3 to play. It was over with. Where Greg, he said he always had just one gear, and he didn't know how to gear down, or he didn't know how to change his plan with 4 or 5 holes left in a tournament when he had a chance to win. He was still trying to strangle the course. And so I think he's more of an enigma to me, because you can't win 90 tournaments, professional tournaments, and be a choker.
And Mickelson did the same thing, right?
I think that's the worst shot ever hit in competition, that drive on 18, because you guys have been there more than I have, but in my lifetime, I never saw anybody carry a ball into 11 East on the fly. Now, he got a little unlucky. If the merchandise tent wasn't there, he wins the Open.
Yep.
Because he's got a pretty easy shot from the. And every time I go to Wingfoot, I stand on that tee and I try to imagine the ball flight that got that ball into the 11th tee fairway on the fly. Knowing that if you miss, you can miss right and chop it out in front of the green, and the best wedge player, supposedly, probably going to have no more than an 8-footer to win the Open, but he's going to a playoff. He had, I've caddied in tournaments where, Jay's had a 1-shot lead going the last hole. And in my mind, we have 2 chances to win the tournament now. We can either win it on this hole or win in a playoff, but don't blow both chances by being stupid, But
18, the first thing you think is like, don't go left. Don't anywhere but left.
Anybody in the world that's ever played there more than twice would know that.
Yeah.
Don't go left. And not only did he go left, he went 100 yards.
Right. Yeah.
So his miss, as we know, if he hits it out to the right, I know the rough was high, but he could chop a wedge down, hit the down slope, run it 30, 40 yards from the green. So if you look at where he was supposed to miss and where he missed, it was probably at least 100 yards, I would say.
Between them. Wow.
Unbelievable when you think about it. A guy that good. And I'll share an interesting story for the people that love the game. So Jay made the cut, and he got paired with Johnny Miller the next day, who was a defending champ. I think he said he shot 78, which he said, by the way, wasn't that bad on that course, as you know, the Massacre at Wingfoot. But I didn't play well. And he said, going back to my hotel, I realized that I learned 2 important things. First thing was that Johnny Miller didn't care about me. I cared about impressing Johnny Miller. He was a defending champ and all that stuff. And the second thing was more important, is that he wasn't supposed to care about me. I need to care about me. So we'll fast forward to the next year at Medina in 75. Jay's playing very good. I think he's within the top 15 going to the 3rd round. And he gets paired with Nicklaus. So 1 year later, he gets to, and Jack shot 75 and Jay shot 72. And so very interesting how some people get it, whatever it is. But this kid at 19 years old figured this out. And 1 year later, beat Jack Nicklaus in the round that he played with him. And I think that's the interesting thing about good players is with all this information and TrackMan and forces and ground forces and obliques and engaging the glutes and stuff. And we can measure all this stuff, but we couldn't measure how that kid figured out going down the Hutchison Parkway what he did wrong that day. I'm swing theoried out personally, but I'm so interested in the people that play and why they're good, because if the three of us 5 or 6 years ago went to Augusta and we sat in the bleachers on the range, we didn't know who anybody was. Okay. Now we've all been around golf our whole lives. We've seen it. And we had to figure out who the #1 player in the world was. Not one of us would have said Jordan Spieth. Right. Not even close. In fact, he might not have been in the top 50, just watching his swing and everything. So, and as you alluded to, Scottie Scheffler. And so the kind of goes back to what Craig said about Dad. He thought he was one of them. I made it this far with the great Sam Snead. I'm going to stick to my game plan. So he went back and put the driver back at the 1-iron, 9-iron, 20 feet. And he said, Sam played the most beautiful pitch shot you ever saw, about 3 feet from the hole. And back then they played stymies. And by sheer luck, my dad missed his putt and it left Snead a stymie. He couldn't putt at the hole. So I said, what would you do in that instance? Just concede a half. He said, no, you got to make the great Sam Snead putt it out sideways and then give it to him. You gotta embarrass him a little bit. So they got to the 42nd hole. This is another, he must have felt like he was one of them stories. So they both had about 25 footers. Snead was getting ready to putt, and my dad says, I don't think you're away. Now, how many guys would do that? Club pros, And Snead says, well, why do I have to believe you? And he said, well, you don't. Let's get a referee. So a referee came out and got a rope and measured it. And Dad was away by 6 inches. And Dad made it, and Snead missed. And when he congratulated my dad, excuse my language, but he said, you hung my ass with that rope. Now, many years later, I was at Bob Goalby's farmhouse in Belleville, Illinois. And I'd gotten in late at night. I was driving from Colonial to Muirfield to caddy for Jay. And he said, I'll leave the door open for you. Here's where your room is and stuff. And I go down and have breakfast, and Sam Snead's there. Snead's staying with Bob. So now I'm sitting there. My dad could embellish stories pretty good. So I always kind of took some of them. He was a great storyteller. So fact is, he did beat him in 42 holes. So there had to be some of it was true. So I wanted to figure out if I could get Snead's version of the story without going, hey, my dad beat you, and PGA, And so I said, Mr. Snead, my dad used to talk about the match he had with you at Norwood Hills. And, he said how lucky he was, he laid you the stymie. I kind of buttered him up a little bit, and he immediately said he was the luckiest SOB. He told the exact story that Dad told. It was unbelievable. He said, your dad shot 63 or 4. He was 6 up. He went through the whole thing. And then he said he hung my ass with that rope on the 42nd hole. So the story was, and you know what? It still bothered Snead. Nowadays they have so much information. I don't know. I don't know if it's good. I think, the Palmers and the Gary players and the Trevinos and the Caspers and the Nicklauses, I mean, they get a tip every now and then from somebody, but they own their own swing. It was theirs. It wasn't somebody else's. It wasn't some guy looking at TrackMan who couldn't break 85 telling him what to do. And I'm not knocking all those guys, by the way, but I'm just not convinced that the great players today are better than the great players of yesterday. There's more good players for sure, no doubt about that. But the great ones, I don't know. Let's throw Tiger out of the equation right now. But who's playing today that would back Palmer off, or Gary Player, or Lee Trevino, or Billy Casper? Would they be afraid to get on the tee with them? I don't think too many. Raymond Floyd. Do you think Raymond would back off one of these guys with that funny looking swing? Tom Watson, So I think it's interesting. But I think all of those guys owned their game. They owned it. It was them. Remember the guy, Mike Donald, who almost won the Open at Medina?
Yep. Yes.
He told me a story recently, which is great. He lost his game and playing the Nationwide Tour, I think they called it. And he was playing with a guy late in the year who was going to finish high enough to get his card. So he said to Mike, what do I need to do on tour? He said, well, at some point you're going to have to shoot 67 on Sunday, playing with Norman or Seve or Raymond Floyd or Jack or somebody. Guy goes, I'm not intimidated by anybody. I play my own game. And yeah, okay, good. Go get him. So of course the guy goes out and misses his cart. And he sees Mike the next year and he says, you were right. So I knew I was right, but you didn't know what I was actually telling you. You had no idea what I was telling you. So you're going to go out on tour and you're going to walk on the range, and Ernie Els is going to be sitting there talking to Phil and Norman and Nick Price and Lanny Watkins, you see, and they all know each other and they're comfortable. They've played with each other 500 times. They've played this tournament 20 times. And you walk on and you are less than zero to these people. They don't know you. They don't care about you. You are not one of them until you play with them on Sunday and shoot 66 or 7. He said, I remember doing it. I think he said at Westchester, playing with Floyd and maybe Norman. And the next week I walked on the tee and Raymond Floyd turned to me and said, hey, Mike, how you doing?
So I did want to ask you about two guys in that particular line, Zalatoris and Cam Young, who've come up pretty quickly, right?
No, I think that they didn't have that. I think that they both had that inner arrogance. I don't mean that in a bad way,
right?
Because they certainly played that way. I watched Cam, last year played so well in the majors. He never looked like the moment was too big for him, and certainly not Zalatoris. So, Zalatoris played good at Winged Foot when he was on the Korn Ferry Tour. I think he finished 5th or 6th in 2020. But that's the part that I think is hard to teach. Cam Young, Sleepy Hollow kid, I guess. He walks around like I'm good. He could have won the Open at St. Andrews.
Yep.
He could have easily won that Open. He was playing with Cameron Smith the last round.
How does Smith make 4 on the road hole behind the bunker?
There you go. So, and that's also interesting. If he makes 5 or 6, Cam Young wins the British Open maybe, or Rory. I remember asking Bob Goalby one time. Bob finished 2nd at Open Hills to Littler, and Player beat him at Aronimink by a shot. And I said to Bob, what's your memory of Open Hills? Did you have a chance? He said, well, Littler, I think 282 once over par 1. He said, well, Littler shot 35, the back 9. Sometimes the guy shoots 37 and the other guy wins, because 37 is not a bad score if you play the back 9 at Winged Foot in the Open, would it be? It wouldn't be choking. And he said, Gary at Aronimink missed 10 greens and got it up and in 10 out of 10 times. He said, sometimes a guy gets up and in 8 out of 10 and the other guy wins. So as you said, he didn't have to get that up and down for 4, right?
Right.
And so there's such a confluence of events that can go into winning a tournament. And a lot of the times it's not, Cam didn't lose that. Young didn't lose that tournament. Smith won it,
Yeah, I don't even think Rory lost it. I think Rory played well. They weren't going in.
No, he missed every putt.
Your dad may win the Open in Winged Foot if Billy Casper doesn't have 27 putts around, right?
But that's the beauty of the game, is you can't play defense. I remember when Tiger won the Masters in 2019 and they compared it to Jack in 86. I said, there's no comparison. Jack played the last 10 holes in 7 under with a bogey. Tiger hit the back 9 2 shots back with the best players in the world. He played the back 9 and 1 under, and they all parted like the Red Sea, which they did, by the way.
Yep.
Every one of them parted. They handed him the tournament. I'm not taking it away from Tiger, because once he saw those guys hitting the ball in the water on 12, walking down the 11th fairway, he turned it into, you guys said you wanted a piece of me, now you're going to get it. I'm relatively healthy. You like that injured Tiger? I'm not injured right now. And he, from there, played beautifully. But they all just folded. Every one of them. It was kind of weird. Good players, too. Guys that were good.
Yeah, that was some back 9.
Jack didn't shoot 35, being 2 shots back and win. He shot 30.
He bogeyed 12, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
In fact, Jay played with him on Saturday. I caddied for Jay. And this is my best caddy story. So Jay was playing good Sunday. And we got to, Yeah, we got to 15, 3 shots back. We're ahead of the leaders. We're ahead of Jack by a couple holes. And it's hard to believe it had wooden clubs back then, because it doesn't seem that long ago when, you know, in a couple months, we're going to see all the highlights of Jack winning and stuff. They didn't have metal woods. So on Tuesday, there was a sprinkler out on 15. It was 234 to the front. And Jay said to me, well, if we're not ahead of that, we're not going for it. He liked to make decisions because he couldn't overpower a course. So he had to kind of chart his way. He said, I can't afford to make stupid sixes on these holes. I have to do something. I have to figure out a way to get it done differently. So I think he's 5 under for the round, just hitting it good. And Jay was good. He could hit the ball right in the middle of the club face almost every time. And so he hits a nice drive, boy, and I'm looking for this sprinkler because I want to send him. You never know. You make eagle, right? You just don't know. And we get there and he's 7 yards behind the. Have you guys heard this story?
Nope.
It's pretty funny. So back then I was running pretty good. I was orbiting the universe, I'd say. And I wanted him to go. And my dad used to tell me that you gamble when you're swinging good, not when you're swinging bad. How about that little tidbit? Jay was really swinging good and it was warm out. And he had 241 to the front, which is a lot, you know, in those days. And he says, how far do we got? And I lied. I took the 7 yards off. I said, you got 234, pins on 16. Oh, that's a perfect 3-wood. So as soon as he says it, I go, what the hell am I doing here? It's Sunday of Augusta. I've just given him the wrong yardage over water. You got to be the dumbest guy that ever lived. So now I'm starting to think, I got to get out of this. I got to say, I added and subtracted. I got confused with I didn't get a good upbringing there at Iona Grammar School. You're good at math. As I'm trying to figure out how am I going to stop them, the handheld CBS cameras running behind us. They're going to show this shot live. So now
It gets
really
better.
Oh, yeah.
oh God. So now you guys caddy, so you understand this. So I'm sitting out there going, what am I doing? You know, this is all happening in 20 seconds. You know, my life is going in front of me. And by now he's over the ball. So I said, well, here we go, boy. You know, and he hit the most beautiful shot I think I've ever seen him hit. This big high draw, and it was there the whole way. And when he started his downswing, I think I was screaming, get up, you know. And he goes, oh no, that's there. Well, I forgot to tell you about that 7 I got here in my caddy bib. My dad called it the white tuxedo. And he had a beautiful shot about 20 feet, 15 feet. So he birdied, parred in, I think finished 5th, maybe shot 66 or 7 the last round. Good tournament, you know, played with Jack, top 5 in a major. We're all pretty happy afterwards. So the next week was Hilton Head. Says, I'll meet you there at 7 o'clock on Tuesday. I said, fine. There, 7 o'clock on Tuesday. He hated practice rounds. It was funny. Jay hated practice rounds. And he said, let's just go. I don't even want to hit balls. Let's get this over with. So being a recovering Catholic, knowing all about confessions, you know, we're walking down the first fairway and I'm thinking, you know, I got to kind of tell him what I did there on 15. I don't know, it's kind of bugging me, even though it turned out right. It wasn't the right thing to do. So I said, Jay, I got a confession to make. And he said, what, you gave me the wrong yardage on 15 on Sunday? He knew it. He said, that was actually good caddying. He said, back to your dad's thing, you gamble when you're swinging good. I was actually going to consider going for it anyway. So that was really good caddying because that's what I wanted to hear. Let's go for it. So I said, well, that's great, you know, really good. But hypothetically, what would have happened if you'd have necked it in the middle of the lake or drop kicked it? Said, I wouldn't have asked you to be at Hilton Head at 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning. So that was my dumbest caddy story ever that turned out good because he was good, not because I was good. And that's when I give him the Claude Harmon story. One time he changed my grip and I said, well, Daddy, it doesn't feel good. His exact words were, you appear to be a bright young man. He didn't say I was. And he asked me if I knew what an inanimate object was, and I said, I think so. And he asked me if the ball was inanimate, and I said, yes. Club inanimate, yes. He said, well, those two things don't care about your feelings. That the downswing is not an encounter group between your feelings, and that the ball is going to go pretty much where the club face tells it, and the grip influences the club face dramatically. So I think most players who start off with bad grips will struggle with golf. And it's funny, I had a conversation with Bones about 6 weeks ago. I've never met Justin Thomas, so I don't know him from Adam. He couldn't pick me out of the lineup. And I said, as a fan, just watching him, I think he has a very interesting issue in the sense that I don't believe in any sense of the world that he's a choker. I said, I think he wants to win so bad. And his desire to win and his desire to be successful is so strong that he has a hard time calming down on Sundays. And he doesn't seem to let the game come to him, let's say, or the round come to him. And Bones agreed. He said he's very hard on himself. I have a funny story. My brother Dick was working with Lanny Watkins, and my dad was at Lochinvar where Butch was. And Lochinvar in Houston is very close to the airport. So Lanny flew down, Dick picked him up, and Lochinvar is maybe 10 minutes away. So they went to work at Lochinvar, but Dad was watching Dick give Lanny a lesson. And Dick said it was the most nervous he's ever been, because usually it was we were watching Dad give a good player lesson. And he said Dad sat there for 2 or 3 hours, never said a word, which he thought was nice. And Lanny, when you watched him in person, was unusually good. He wasn't just good, he was unusually good. His ball striking capabilities were really, really very, very impressive. And he had a great session. And they went in for lunch, and Lanny my dad turned to Lanny and he said, you know, I only have 2 things to tell you. And Lanny kind of perked up and he said, first thing I do is make sure I get my clubs and myself to the tee on time. And the second thing I would do is I'd change my route to the bank every Monday so you don't get robbed. What I'm really curious about is, why are you taking lessons from Dick? He said, because your ball comes out like it's delivered from a Remington rifle, and Dick's ball comes out like it's delivered by a seed gun going 360 degrees all over the course. So it took Dad about 3 hours to get the harpoon into Dick after he buttered Lanny up. But his point was, he wouldn't have changed anything with Lanny Watkins' swing, even though it had a lot of individual characteristics, very low hands, incredibly fast tempo. If you ever look at Lanny's swing in slow motion, go to YouTube, very odd impact position with his left arm bent and his left wrist cupped, a little bit like Lee Westwood. These were all things that Dad probably would not have looked at in a model swing, but Dad looked at the ball, and the ball liked Lanny's swing, so he wouldn't have changed anything.
Thanks for joining us
Casper,
today.
Billy
We
Harmon,
really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity,
And please
Arky,
subscribe to the
2
show
Outer,
and hit
Claude
the bell
Harmon,
icon so you get notified
Movie
of
Classics,
new episodes.
Mark Gable,
Hit them
Odd
hard
Job,
and hit them off.
Best 36 Holes.